I answered the phone on the third ring. It was 3:47 in the morning, and in my 66 years on this earth, I've learned that calls at this hour never bring good news. My name's Andrew Andrews, and I spent 30 years as a police detective before retiring 8 years ago. You'd think all that experience would have prepared me for what came next. "Hello?" Static crackled through the line. Then a woman's voice, professional but urgent. "Is this Andrew Andrews speaking?" "Yes, this is Detective Andrews." Old habits die hard. Even after 8 years of retirement, I still introduced myself that way. Sarah always teased me about it. "Mr. Andrews, my name is Michelle Rodriguez. I'm a social worker at Methodist Hospital in Houston. I'm calling about your daughter." My hand tightened on the phone. Sarah stirred beside me in bed. After 36 years of marriage, she was a light sleeper when it came to late-night calls. We'd had too many of them over the years. "My daughter?" "Yes, sir. Jessica. She's here and she's asking for you." The room tilted. I sat up straight, my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor of our bedroom in Cedar Rapids. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the sound of my heart starting to race. "That's impossible," I said. The words came out flat, mechanical, the way they used to when I had to deliver bad news to families. "My daughter died 31 years ago." There was a pause. In my detective days, I'd learned to read those pauses. This one felt heavy, loaded with something I couldn't quite identify yet. "Mr. Andrews, I understand this must be shocking, but the woman here has identification. She says she's Jessica Andrews. She has a birthmark on her left shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon. She says you used to call it her lucky moon when she was little." I stopped breathing. In 30 years of police work, I'd dealt with dozens of con artists, scammers, people who preyed on grieving families. They'd study missing person cases, memorize details from newspaper articles, police reports, anything they could get their hands on. I'd become an expert at spotting them, at asking the right questions, at protecting families from false hope. But nobody knew about that birthmark. Nobody except family. We'd never mentioned it in any missing person reports, never told the investigating officers. It was our private thing, something I'd made up when Jessica was 3 years old and terrified of the dark. I'd tell her the lucky moon on her shoulder would protect her while she slept. "Mr. Andrews, are you still there?" My voice cracked. Professional composure, 30 years of it, crumbled in an instant. "Where did you say she is?" "Methodist Hospital, the psychiatric unit. She was brought in 2 days ago after a crisis intervention. She's stable now, but she's asking for you. She says she finally knows who she is." I looked at the clock on my nightstand, 3:49 a.m. Houston was a 4-hour drive from Cedar Rapids, maybe 5 if I hit traffic. But at this hour, the highways would be empty. I could be there by 8 a.m. I'm on my way. I hung up before she could say anything else, before I could think too hard about what I was doing, before 31 years of grief could talk me out of it, before my detective training could kick in and start asking all the hard questions. Sarah was awake now, watching me with that careful expression she gets when she thinks I'm about to do something reckless. Her gray hair was mussed from sleep, her blue eyes sharp and alert despite the hour. She'd always been my anchor, the practical one who kept me grounded when cases got too personal. Who was that? "Someone says they found Jessica." She sat up straight, the sheet falling away from her shoulders. "Andrew." "I know." I was already pulling on my jeans, grabbing yesterday's shirt from the chair beside our dresser. "I know how it sounds, but she knew about the birthmark, Sarah. She knew about the lucky moon." Sarah's face went pale. She understood the significance of that detail better than anyone. She'd been there when I'd made up that silly story, had watched me tell it to Jessica night after night until our daughter was old enough to sleep without fear. We'd had calls before over the years, maybe half a dozen in the first decade after Jessica disappeared. Con artists mostly. People who'd read about our missing daughter and thought they could exploit a grieving family. My detective training had helped us spot them quickly. They always got the details wrong, asked leading questions, tried to fish for information. But the lucky moon? That was different. That was something no one else could know. "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, already reaching for her clothes. "No." I said it more gently than I felt. "Not yet. Let me see first. If it's real, I'll call you immediately. If it's not," I couldn't finish that sentence out loud. "If it's not, I'll fall apart. And I need you to be here, solid and whole, so I have something to come back to." someone who can put me back together again. She understood. After 36 years of marriage, she always understood the things I couldn't say. The drive to Houston was the longest 4 hours of my life. I'd made this trip dozens of times during my years on the force, usually chasing down leads, interviewing witnesses, following up on cases that had gone cold. But never like this. Never with this terrible, fragile hope burning in my chest like a live coal. I kept the radio off, needed silence to think, to remember, to prepare myself for whatever I was about to find. My detective instincts were kicking in, analyzing the call, looking for holes in the story. But that birthmark detail kept circling back. How could anyone know about that? The highway stretched out in front of me, empty except for the occasional truck. Iowa farmland gave way to Missouri, then Arkansas, then finally Texas. Mile markers ticking by like a countdown. Each one bringing me closer to something that could either resurrect my daughter or destroy what was left of my peace. Jessica had been 17 when she disappeared. December 14th, 1993. A Tuesday. I remember because I'd been working a robbery case, staying late at the precinct to interview suspects. Sarah had called me around 11 p.m., voice tight with worry. Jessica wasn't home yet. She'd told us she was going to a friend's house after school to study for a chemistry test. We'd found out later she'd lied. Not about the studying, but about where she was going and who she was with. She'd actually gone to meet a boy. Not the clean-cut kid from her physics class we thought she was dating, some honor student named Danny, who brought her flowers and called her Miss Andrews when he came to the door. No, this was an older guy, 23, who worked at a garage on the east side of town. Marcus, his name was. Marcus Kelly. I'd memorized every detail about him during those first frantic weeks. Tall, thin, tattoos covering both arms, a record for petty theft and drug possession. The kind of guy who should have set off every alarm bell in a detective's head if he'd ever met my daughter properly. But Jessica had kept him secret. They'd had a fight that night, something about him wanting her to leave with him, go to California, start over. She'd said no. She was 17, a senior in high school, had colleges already sending her acceptance letters. She wasn't throwing her future away for some punk who couldn't hold down a steady job. He'd gotten angry, called her names I won't repeat, then left her at a bus stop on the wrong side of Houston at 11 p.m., angry and alone in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. That was the last anyone saw of her. I'd interrogated Marcus for 6 hours straight when we finally tracked him down 2 days later. Used every technique I'd learned in 20 years of police work. But his story never changed. Yes, he'd left her at that bus stop. No, he didn't know what happened after that. Yes, he was an idiot for leaving a teenage girl alone in that neighborhood. No, he hadn't hurt her. The polygraph backed him up. So did the timeline. He'd gone straight to a bar after leaving Jessica, had receipts and witnesses to prove it, stayed there until closing time, then went home with some woman whose name he couldn't remember but whose address we verified. He was a lot of things, but he wasn't our killer. For 3 years, we'd searched, put up posters, worked with police departments across 3 states, hired private investigators we couldn't afford. I used every contact I had on the force, called in every favor, followed up on every lead no matter how slim. Sarah stopped sleeping. I stopped everything that wasn't work or searching for Jessica. Christopher and Matthew, our sons, were 16 and 13 when their sister disappeared. They watched their parents fall apart in real time. Christopher started getting into fights at school, his grades dropping. Matthew just withdrew, spent hours in his room reading, barely speaking to any of us. Our family was imploding. Then in 1996, they'd found remains. Female, approximately 17 to 19 years old, found in a wooded area outside the city limits. The body had been there for months, maybe longer. Animals had gotten to it. Weather had done the rest. Dental records were inconclusive. The damage was too extensive, and we'd never had reason to get extensive dental x-rays of a healthy 17-year-old. But there was other evidence. A jacket that looked like the one Jessica had been wearing that night. Dark blue denim, slightly oversized. A silver ring that might have been hers, though we couldn't be completely sure. Jessica had several rings, changed them out depending on her mood. The forensics team said they were 70% certain it was her. 70% had been enough. We were exhausted, broke, falling apart. We needed closure, needed permission to grieve, needed to stop living in that terrible limbo between hope and despair. We'd held a memorial service. buried an empty casket in Cedar Memorial Gardens, tried to move forward, tried to rebuild what was left of our family. Some days I even convinced myself we had. I reached Houston just after 8 o'clock in the morning. The city was waking up, early commuters filling the highways, coffee shops opening their doors, normal people starting normal days, completely unaware that somewhere in this sprawling metropolis, my world might be about to turn upside down. Methodist Hospital sat in the medical district, a massive complex that seemed to stretch for blocks. I'd been here before during my detective years, usually following up on assault cases or interviewing victims. But it looked different now, more intimidating somehow. Maybe because this time, I wasn't here as a cop. I was here as a father, clinging to hope I'd buried 28 years ago. I found parking in the visitor's garage, walked through the main entrance past the gift shop and information desk. The lobby was busy despite the early hour. Families huddled together on uncomfortable chairs, doctors in scrubs walking briskly toward elevators, the constant background hum of a place where life and death decisions happened every minute. I asked for Michelle Rodriguez at the information desk. The volunteer, an elderly woman with kind eyes, made a quick call, then directed me to a bank of elevators. 4th floor, psychiatric unit. She'll meet you there. Psychiatric unit. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. In all my years as a detective, I'd dealt with mental health crises, had learned to spot the signs of trauma, dissociation, breakdown. But thinking about my daughter in that context, imagining what might have driven her to a psychiatric emergency, made my chest tight. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like it took forever. I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors, seeing a 66-year-old man with gray hair and worry lines that had deepened considerably in the past 6 hours. I looked older than I felt, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. Michelle Rodriguez was waiting for me when the doors opened. Late 30s, professional but warm, the sort of face that had seen too much suffering and somehow remained compassionate. She wore a blue blazer over dark slacks, carried a file folder that I assumed contained information about the woman who might be my daughter. "Mr. Andrews, thank you for coming so quickly." She shook my hand with a firm grip. "I want to prepare you before you see her. This is going to be difficult." We walked down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor polish. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might collapse right there in the hallway. After 30 years of police work, I'd thought I was prepared for anything. But this was different. This was personal in a way that cut right through all my professional training. "Tell me about her condition," I said, falling into detective mode. It was easier to ask the hard questions when I could pretend this was just another case. "Jessica has been through significant trauma, Mr. Andrews. She's had what we believe is a dissociative episode triggered by recovered memories. She's been living under a different name for the past 31 years. "What name?" "Ashley Parker. She's been in Houston the whole time, working various jobs, mostly in the service industry. She's been homeless intermittently, struggled with addiction issues, though she's been clean for 3 years now, according to her records." Addiction, homelessness. The words were like physical blows. I'd imagined a lot of scenarios over the years, but never this. Never my little girl living on the streets, fighting demons I couldn't protect her from. 3 days ago, she saw a poster, Michelle continued. One of the old missing person posters for Jessica Andrews. Someone had shared it on social media, part of a cold case awareness campaign. When she saw the photo, something broke open. We stopped outside a door marked 412. Michelle turned to face me, her expression serious. She's been having flashbacks, fragments of memory, a house with blue shutters, a mother who made cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings, a father who built her a tree house but was afraid of heights himself, so she had to climb up first to test if it was safe. I stopped breathing. The tree house. I'd forgotten about that tree house until she mentioned it. It had been in our backyard in our old house, the one we'd sold after Jessica disappeared because we couldn't stand to look at her empty room anymore. I'd built it the summer she turned 9, spent weeks working on it despite my terror of being more than 6 feet off the ground. Jessica had thought it was hilarious, watching her tough cop father shake like a leaf on a ladder. She'd climb up first every time, test the platform, then call down that it was safe for me to follow. "Come on, Dad, don't be such a chicken." "The treehouse," I said quietly. "You built it?" I was terrified of heights, still am. I looked at Michelle, saw something shift in her expression. She really remembers? She does. But Mr. Andrews, before we go in, you need to understand something. She's scared. Scared you'll be angry with her for disappearing. Scared you'll blame her. Scared you won't believe her. Or worse, that you will believe her and won't want her back after all these years. That's impossible. Trauma isn't rational, Mr. Andrews. Michelle's hand was on the door handle. She's in here. I'll give you some privacy, but I'll be right outside if you need anything. She pushed the door open. The room was small, standard hospital setup. Bed with white sheets, a single chair by the window, blinds half drawn to let in the morning sunlight. A woman sat in the chair by the window, backlit so I couldn't see her face clearly at first. She stood up when I entered, slowly, like her legs might not hold her. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was older, of course. 48 now, not 17. Her hair was shorter than Jessica's had been, darker, streaked with premature gray. She was too thin, her face lined with years I hadn't witnessed, marked by experiences I couldn't even imagine. She wore donated clothes, simple sweatpants and a faded t-shirt that hung loose on her frame. She stood with her shoulders hunched, like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. But her eyes were Jessica's eyes, the same unusual color, gray-blue with flecks of green that caught the light, the same way of looking at you, direct and slightly defiant, even when she was scared, even when she was broken. Dad. The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times in the first years after she disappeared. In my imagination, I'd always been strong, calm, the pillar she could lean on, the competent detective who had everything under control. Instead, I stood there shaking, tears streaming down my face, unable to form words. She took a hesitant step forward. I don't remember everything yet, but I remember you. I remember the treehouse. I remember you teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, how you ran behind me for 3 hours, even though your back was killing you because I was too scared to try without you there. I did remember that. She'd been 6 years old, determined to learn before her first day of first grade because all the big kids at school rode bikes. I'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon in our driveway, bent over at an awkward angle, one hand on her back, one on the seat, jogging alongside that little pink bicycle until my spine felt like it was going to snap. I remember the way you'd read me the Narnia books before bed, she continued, her voice getting stronger. You'd do all the different voices. Aslan always sounded like Darth Vader, and the White Witch sounded like that mean neighbor lady, Mrs. Henderson. God, I'd forgotten about Mrs. Henderson. Grumpy old woman who lived next door to our first house, always complaining about noise, about our dog, about Jessica's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. I'd made fun of her voice when reading to Jessica, making my daughter giggle under her covers. I remember you were afraid of heights, but you built me that treehouse anyway because I wanted one so badly. And I remember... Her voice broke. I remember our last fight, about my curfew, about that stupid party I wanted to go to. I screamed that I hated you. Those words, they'd haunted me for 31 years. The last thing my daughter had said to me, shouted in teenage fury before slamming her bedroom door. I hate you. I wish you weren't my father. I didn't mean it, she said now, tears starting. I need you to know that. I was 17 and stupid and angry, but I didn't hate you. I wanted to hurt you because you were trying to protect me, and I thought I didn't need protection. Jessica. My voice came out as a whisper. I don't know if I can be her again. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small. I don't know if I'm still that person. I've been someone else for so long. I've done things. I've had to do things. I closed the distance between us in 3 steps, pulled her into my arms. She was stiff at first, uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to be held, how to accept comfort. Then she collapsed against me like a puppet with cut strings. She smelled wrong, not like my daughter, not like the girl who'd used strawberry shampoo and worn too much of her mother's perfume and always smelled faintly of the art supplies she loved so much. She smelled like hospital soap and fear and decades of hard living. But when I closed my eyes, I could feel the shape of her. The way her head fit against my shoulder, exactly the same despite everything. The way she'd always been tall for her age, almost as tall as me by the time she was 15. You're alive, I whispered into her hair. You're alive. That's all that matters. We stood there for a long time, both of us crying, both of us trying to bridge 31 years of absence with a single embrace. Outside, Houston continued its morning routine. Cars honked. People hurried to work. The world moved forward like it did every day. But in that small hospital room, time stopped. My daughter was alive. Everything else could wait. Eventually we sat down. She took the chair by the window. I perched on the edge of the hospital bed. The morning sun was streaming in now, making the small room feel warmer, less clinical. But the brightness also highlighted how thin she was, how the years had worn her down to something fragile and sharp. "Tell me what you remember," I said gently. In my detective days, I'd learned when to push for information and when to let people talk at their own pace. This was definitely a time for patience. Jessica wrapped her arms around herself again, that defensive posture that broke my heart. "It comes in pieces," she said, "like a jigsaw puzzle that's been scattered, and I'm finding one piece at a time." She stared out the window for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I remember that night, December 14th. I was angry, so angry at you and Mom for not understanding, for treating me like a child when I felt so grown up. "You were 17, I said quietly. "I know that now. But that night, I felt like I was 25, like I knew everything about the world and you two were just trying to control me for no reason." She managed a weak smile. Funny how trauma can freeze you and age you at the same time. The night came back to me in pieces, too. Sarah and I had been arguing about Christmas plans when Jessica burst in, demanding permission to go to some party across town. When we said no, she'd exploded. Called us old-fashioned, said we didn't trust her, accused us of ruining her social life. "Marcus," I said. She nodded. "I went to meet him at that coffee shop on Westheimer. We'd been seeing each other for about 2 months. I knew you wouldn't approve. He was older, had that bad boy thing that seemed so exciting to a girl who'd lived her whole life in the suburbs with 2 parents who actually cared about her. What happened with Marcus that night? He wanted me to leave with him. Said he'd gotten a job offer in Los Angeles, working at some garage out there. Wanted me to drop out of high school, forget about college, just run away and start over." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Can you imagine? I had early acceptance to 3 universities, scholarship offers, my whole future mapped out, and he wanted me to throw it all away to follow him to California. You said no. I said no. We fought. Really fought. He called me a spoiled little rich girl who didn't understand how the real world worked. Said I was too scared to take any real risks, that I'd end up just like my parents, boring and safe and wasting my life." Even 31 years later, I could hear the hurt in her voice. Whatever else Marcus had done wrong, he'd known exactly where to strike to cause the most damage to a 17-year-old girl's sense of herself. He left me at that bus stop on Hastings Street, just drove away, angry, leaving me there at 11 at night in that neighborhood. She shuddered. "I was scared, but I was also stubborn. Too proud to call you for a ride. I figured I'd take the bus home, sneak in through my bedroom window, and you'd never know I'd broken curfew. But you didn't make it to the bus." "No." Her voice got very quiet. "Someone approached me while I was waiting. A woman, maybe 30, really friendly. She asked if I was okay, if I needed help. She seemed so concerned, so maternal. Said her name was Linda, that she worked at a women's shelter downtown." I felt my detective instincts sharpening. This was how it started, how predators worked. Find someone vulnerable, isolated, offer help that seems genuine. She said she was driving that way anyway, could give me a ride to wherever I needed to go. She had this really nice car, looked professional, respectable. Everything my parents had taught me about stranger danger went right out the window because I was cold and scared, and she seemed like someone who actually cared. Jessica's hands were shaking now. I wanted to reach out, hold them, but I sensed she needed to get this out without interruption. "I got in the car," she continued. "That's the last clear memory I have for a long time after that. Everything else is fragments, pieces of nightmare that come back when I'm not expecting them." "What kind of fragments?" "A house that smelled like cigarettes and something else, something medical. Other girls, some younger than me, some older, being moved around a lot, different houses, different cities maybe. Years of being Ashley Parker, of forgetting completely that I'd ever been Jessica Andrews." She looked at me directly for the first time since she'd started talking, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tight. Dad, I think I was trafficked. For 31 years, I think I was part of something horrible, and I just forgot. My mind just locked it all away so I could survive. The words hit me like physical blows. My daughter, my little girl who I'd taught to ride a bike, who I'd read bedtime stories to, who'd laughed at my terrible voices while we read about Narnia together. Trafficked. For 31 years. The word hung in the air between us like a live grenade. Trafficked. In 30 years of police work, I'd worked human trafficking cases. I'd seen what it did to people, how it broke them down into fragments of who they used to be. I'd interviewed survivors, witnessed their testimony, watched grown men cry in interrogation rooms when they realized what they'd been part of. But this was my daughter. My hands clenched into fists without my conscious decision. Every protective instinct I'd ever had as a father, every investigative instinct I'd developed as a detective, was screaming at me to do something, find someone, make them pay. But Jessica needed me to be calm right now. She needed me to be her father, not the angry cop. "How much do you remember?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. "Pieces. Like I said, it's all fragmented." She was staring out the window again, not able to meet my eyes when talking about this. I remember being called Ashley Parker. I remember having identification that said that was my name, but never questioning where it came from. I remember years of work. Different places, different people, moving around a lot. She paused, took a shaky breath. I remember being good at forgetting, like my mind had built this wall around Jessica Andrews, locked her away so completely that Ashley Parker could function, could survive, could do what she had to do without falling apart completely. When did the memories start coming back? About 5 years ago. Little things at first. Dreams about a house with blue shutters that didn't match any place Ashley had ever lived. Waking up sometimes and not knowing why I was crying. Feeling like there was someone else inside my head, someone I'd forgotten about. I thought about those 5 years, what Sarah and I had been doing while Jessica was slowly remembering she existed. I'd retired from the force, finally. We'd moved to the smaller house in Cedar Rapids, started talking about travel, about visiting Christopher and his kids more often, normal retirement stuff, while our daughter was living on the streets of Houston, fighting to remember her own name. "The poster," I said. "That poster." She looked at me then, and I saw something like relief in her eyes. Relief that she didn't have to explain this part, that I understood how seeing her own 17-year-old face could shatter 31 years of dissociation. It was like a dam breaking, like Jessica had been banging on that wall for 5 years, and suddenly it just crumbled. "Michelle said you had a crisis intervention." Jessica nodded. "I was working at a diner, late shift. Someone had shared that cold case post on Facebook, and my coworker showed it to me during our break. Said I looked like the missing girl. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but then I saw the name, Jessica Andrews, and something just snapped." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I started screaming, right there in the break room, just screaming. I couldn't stop. Everything came flooding back at once. 31 years of memories I'd buried, all hitting me at the same time. My coworker called 911, thought I was having some kind of breakdown. "You were." I was. But it wasn't a breakdown exactly. It was more like waking up. Like I'd been sleepwalking for 31 years, and suddenly I remembered who I was supposed to be. There was a knock on the door. Michelle came in, apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some practical matters we need to discuss, Mr. Andrews." I stood up, reluctantly. The detective in me knew she was right. There would be procedures to follow, investigations to launch, systems to navigate. But the father in me just wanted to stay here, hold my daughter, try to make up for 31 lost years with presence. "Jessica needs to rest," Michelle continued. "This level of memory recovery is exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and there are some things you need to know about what happens next." We stepped into the hallway. Michelle kept her voice low, professional. "We'll need to do a DNA test to confirm her identity, though given what you've told me about the birthmark and the specific memories, I don't think there's much doubt." I nodded. Standard procedure. I'd requested plenty of DNA tests during my career. The police will want to interview her extensively. There's a federal human trafficking task force that's going to be very interested in her case. What she's described, if she was trafficked for 31 years, this could be connected to a much larger operation. My detective brain was already spinning up, thinking about jurisdictions, federal versus local authority, evidence preservation, witness protection. She'll need a lawyer, she will. And she'll need extensive therapy, Mr. Andrews. What she's describing is severe complex PTSD, the integration process, helping Ashley Parker and Jessica Andrews become one whole person again. That's going to take months, maybe years, whatever she needs. Michelle hesitated. There's something else, something difficult. The remains you buried in 1996. Right. In all the emotion of the past few hours, I'd almost forgotten. We'll need to re-examine them. The police have already been contacted. If Jessica is alive, then someone else's daughter is in that grave. Someone else's family has been living with uncertainty while you had closure, even false closure. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. For 28 years, Sarah and I had been able to grieve, to move forward, to build a life after loss. Somewhere out there, another family might still be searching, still posting on Facebook, still hoping for a call like the one I'd gotten this morning. Do they know who it was? Not yet. They'll need to exhume the remains, run new DNA tests. It could take weeks, maybe months to get answers. I thought about that other family, that other father who might be getting a very different kind of call soon, one that would end his hope instead of resurrect it. Mr. Andrews, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for this? Not just today, but long term. Jessica isn't the girl you lost. She may never fully be that girl again. She's a 48-year-old woman with 3 decades of trauma and survival strategies that might be very hard for you to understand or accept. This isn't going to be a simple reunion. She's my daughter. The words came out with all the authority my old badge used to carry. I don't care who she had to become to survive. I don't care what she's done or what was done to her. She's my daughter, and I've had 31 years to grieve her. I'm not wasting another second. Michelle nodded, and I saw something like approval in her expression. Then you should call your wife and prepare yourself for a very long road ahead. I called Sarah from the hospital parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. Muscle memory from 36 years of marriage finally guiding my fingers to the right buttons. She answered on the first ring. Andrew? It's her. My voice cracked on the words. Sarah, it's really her. It's Jessica. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like forever. Then I heard it, a sound I hadn't heard from my wife in decades. The sound she'd made in the early days after Jessica disappeared, when grief was still fresh and raw and overwhelming. A broken sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Are you sure? I'm sure. She knew about the treehouse, about the lucky moon. She remembered things, Sarah. Things only our daughter would know. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. She remembered our last fight. Oh, God. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, God, Andrew. Where has she been? What happened to her? That's complicated. She's been living here in Houston the whole time, but under a different name. She thinks she was trafficked, Sarah, for 31 years. Another silence. Then Sarah's voice, stronger, now, the voice of a woman who'd taught high school for 30 years and knew how to compartmentalize crisis to deal with what needed dealing with. I'm coming. Right now. I'll be there in 4 hours. You don't have to. Andrew, she cut me off, and I could hear her moving around, probably already packing. Our daughter has been alive for 31 years, and we buried someone else. I'm coming. Don't you dare try to handle this alone. She was right, of course. She was always right about things like this. Drive carefully. And Sarah, yeah? She's different. She's not the girl we lost. She's been through things we can't even imagine. I know. I'll see you soon. I hung up and stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching Houston go about its business. Traffic flowing on the medical center streets, people walking to appointments, ambulances arriving and departing. Normal life, continuing as if my world hadn't just been turned completely upside down. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher, my older son. Dad called the house and Mom told me. Is it really Jessica? Do you need me to come down there? I typed back quickly. Yes, it's her. Stay put for now. We'll call you tonight. Another text, this one from Matthew. Holy shit, Dad. Mom just called me. Is this real? It's real. We'll explain everything later. Love you. I went back inside to find Michelle waiting for me in the lobby. How did your wife take the news? She's on her way. I checked my watch. Almost 11 a.m. What happens now? Now we start the formal process. DNA testing first, though I think we both know what that's going to show. Then we'll need to get the police involved, start building a case file. She led me through corridors I was starting to recognize, past the elevators to a smaller office marked Social Services. The room was cramped but functional, file cabinets along one wall, a desk covered with paperwork, 2 chairs that had seen better days. I've already contacted Detective Martinez with Houston PD's Human Trafficking Unit, Michelle said, settling behind the desk. He'll want to interview Jessica, but we're going to take that slow. Her mental state is still very fragile. Detective Martinez. I filed the name away, along with questions I'd want to ask him about his experience, his caseload, his success rate with trafficking prosecutions. Old habits. What about the federal task force you mentioned? FBI will definitely want to talk to her. What she's describing, if it's accurate, could be connected to operations they've been tracking for years. But again, we have to balance the investigation with her recovery. A technician knocked on the door, introduced herself as someone from the lab. The DNA test was surprisingly quick, just a cheek swab that took less than a minute to collect. She explained the process, how they'd run it against the sample we'd provided 28 years ago when the remains were found, how results should be available within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It seemed both impossibly long and remarkably fast. 31 years of not knowing, and now we had to wait 14 more days for scientific confirmation of something my heart already knew with absolute certainty. After the technician left, Michelle pulled out a thick file. I need to prepare you for what the police interviews are going to be like, Mr. Andrews. They're going to want details. Specific details about places, people, dates, things that might be very difficult for Jessica to remember or talk about. I was a detective for 30 years, I said. I know how these interviews work. Do you? Have you ever interviewed a trafficking survivor who's been dissociating for 3 decades? Her voice was gentle but firm. Because I have. And it's nothing like interviewing witnesses to a burglary or even a homicide. The trauma is different. The memory issues are different. Everything is different. She was right, and I knew it. Human trafficking cases had been rare in my jurisdiction during my time on the force, mostly handled by federal agencies or specialized units in larger cities. My experience was with more straightforward crimes, where victims could give clear timelines and specific details. What should I expect? Expect it to be frustrating. Expect Jessica to remember some things in perfect detail and have complete blank spots about others. Expect her to get overwhelmed and need to stop frequently. Expect the interviews to trigger more memories, not all of them pleasant. She leaned forward, her expression serious. And expect the investigation to take years, Mr. Andrews. These cases are incredibly complex. Even if they can build a case, most of the perpetrators might be dead or in prison for other crimes. Jessica might never get the justice she deserves in a legal sense. What kind of justice will she get? The kind that comes from being believed, from having her story heard and validated, from rebuilding her life on her own terms. Michelle smiled slightly. From having her father drive 4 hours in the middle of the night because she called for him. Through the office window, I could see the parking lot where I'd called Sarah. In a few hours, my wife would be here, and we'd start the long process of becoming a family again. Not the family we'd been before, but something new. Something that could accommodate 31 years of absence and trauma and survival. Mr. Andrews? Michelle's voice brought me back to the present. Are you ready to see Jessica again? She's been asking for you. I stood up. I've been ready for 31 years. I spent the next 3 hours in Jessica's room, just talking. Not about the investigation, not about what came next, just talking like a father and daughter who had 31 years of catching up to do. She told me about the life Ashley Parker had built, the jobs she'd worked, the people she'd known. It was strange hearing about my daughter's life through the lens of someone else's identity, but I listened to every word. She'd been a waitress, a hotel housekeeper, a grocery store clerk. She'd lived in apartments and shelters and sometimes on the streets. She'd struggled with addiction for years before getting clean. She'd been arrested twice, both times for prostitution, though she couldn't remember the details clearly. "I was good at forgetting," she said again. "Ashley was really good at just surviving. Day by day, moment by moment, never looking too far ahead, never looking too far back." "What made you want to get clean?" "A girl named Rosa. She couldn't have been more than 16, reminded me of someone, but I couldn't place who. She overdosed in the shelter where I was staying. I found her in the bathroom, called 911, but it was too late." Jessica stared at her hands. "After that, I kept having dreams about a teenage girl, but I couldn't see her face clearly. Something about Rosa's death triggered something in me, made me want to remember who I used to be. That teenage girl in her dreams, I realized, had probably been herself." Some part of Jessica had been trying to break through even then, 5 years ago. "Did Rosa look like you did at 17? "Maybe. I don't know. I couldn't remember what I looked like at 17. But seeing her there, so young and wasted, it felt like losing someone I should have been able to protect. The protective instinct passed down from father to daughter. Even after everything she'd been through, Jessica still felt responsible for others, still wanted to save people. It gave me hope that the girl I'd raised was still in there somewhere, underneath all the survival mechanisms Ashley Parker had built. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Michelle peeked in. "Mrs. Andrews is here." My heart jumped. Sarah had made good time, driven fast enough that I was probably going to have to scold her later about speeding. But right now, I was just grateful she was here. "Are you ready to see your mother?" I asked Jessica. She looked terrified. What if she doesn't believe it's me? What if she takes one look at me and knows I'm not really her daughter anymore? "Jessica," I took her hands in mine, "your mother has been waiting for this moment for 31 years. She's not going to care what you look like or what you've been through. She's just going to be grateful you're alive." Sarah appeared in the doorway a moment later. She'd obviously been crying during the drive, her eyes red and puffy, her usually perfect hair disheveled. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt, clothes thrown on in haste, and she looked older than her 64 years. But her face, when she saw Jessica, transformed completely. "My baby," she whispered. Jessica stood up slowly, uncertain. "Mom?" Sarah crossed the room in 2 steps, pulled Jessica into her arms with a fierceness that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her 38 years ago. My wife was a force of nature when it came to protecting the people she loved, and that hadn't changed. "I knew it," Sarah said, holding Jessica tight. "I knew you were still out there somewhere. I could feel it. A mother knows." They held each other for a long time, both crying, both trying to make up for decades of missed hugs with a single embrace. I stood back and watched. This reunion I'd imagined so many times, but never quite believed would happen. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah cupped Jessica's face in her hands, studying her features like she was memorizing them. "You look so much like your grandmother did at this age." "My mother. She died 10 years ago, but she never stopped asking about you." "Tell me about her," Jessica said. "I don't remember much about Grandma Helen." So Sarah told her. About Helen's garden, about the way she'd spoil her grandchildren with homemade cookies and too many Christmas presents, about how she'd insisted on setting an extra place at every holiday dinner, just in case Jessica found her way home, about how she'd made Sarah promise to never give up hope. "She believed you were alive," Sarah said. "Even when the rest of us started to accept that you might be gone forever, she insisted you were out there somewhere, just lost." Jessica started crying again. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't find my way back sooner." "Don't you dare apologize," Sarah said firmly. "You survived. That's what matters. You survived, and now you're home." Home. The word hung in the air, complicated and loaded with questions none of us were ready to answer yet. Where was home for Jessica now? Could she ever really come back to the life she'd left behind? Did she even want to? Detective Martinez arrived while Sarah was telling Jessica about her brothers' lives, their families, the nieces and nephews she'd never met. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of easy manner that put victims at ease. He introduced himself quietly, explained that he'd like to schedule a formal interview for the next day if Jessica felt up to it. Nothing too intensive at first, he assured her. Just basic information, timeline stuff. We can work up to the more detailed interviews gradually. Jessica looked at me, then at Sarah. Will you be there? If you want us there, we'll be there, I said. Martinez nodded approvingly. Family support is crucial in these cases. Makes a huge difference in recovery and in the strength of any eventual prosecution. After he left, the three of us sat in that small hospital room and talked until visiting hours ended. About small things, safe things, Sarah's garden, my retirement, what the boys were doing with their lives. Normal family conversation, the kind we'd been deprived of for 31 years. When we finally had to leave, Jessica grabbed my hand. Will you come back tomorrow? Every day, I promised, for as long as you need us. The next 2 weeks became a strange kind of routine. Sarah and I checked into a hotel near the hospital, extending our stay indefinitely. Every morning, we'd drive to Methodist, spend hours with Jessica, then return to our temporary home to process everything we'd learned that day. The police interviews started slowly, just as Detective Martinez had promised. Basic information at first. Jessica's memories of that December night in 1993, what she could recall about the woman who'd offered her a ride, the fragments of her early captivity. Martinez was good at his job, patient and thorough without being pushy. Memory recovery in trauma cases is like archaeological work, he explained to us after the first formal interview. You have to dig carefully, brush away the dirt bit by bit, or you risk destroying the very thing you're trying to uncover. Jessica remembered more each day, but not in any logical sequence. One afternoon, she'd recall specific details about a house in East Houston where she'd been held for months, maybe years. The next day, she'd remember a cross-country trip, being moved with other girls to a different city entirely. Her memories were like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle scattered across 3 decades, and we were all trying to fit them together into something that made sense. The federal agents arrived on day 5. FBI specialists in human trafficking, serious people in dark suits who spoke in careful, measured tones about ongoing investigations and prosecution strategies. They were respectful but intense, clearly recognizing that Jessica's case could be the key to unraveling something much larger. Based on her description of the initial contact and the subsequent operations, this appears connected to a trafficking network we've been tracking for years, Agent Sarah Foster told us in a private meeting. If Ms. Andrews is willing to work with us, her testimony could help us build cases against people who are still operating. Still operating. The words hit me like a physical blow. While we'd been mourning Jessica, while we'd built our quiet retirement life in Cedar Rapids, predators had continued hunting. Other families were living our nightmare right now, not knowing if their missing daughters were alive or dead. Whatever you need from her, I told Agent Foster. But she comes first. Her recovery comes first. Absolutely. We don't build cases on broken witnesses, Mr. Andrews. Her healing is our priority, too. The DNA results came back on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after that first phone call. Michelle called me at the hotel to deliver news we already knew but needed to hear officially. It's a positive match, Mr. Andrews. Jessica is your daughter. I found myself crying in a hotel room in Houston, 31 years of grief finally finding release. Sarah held me while I sobbed, both of us overwhelmed by the finality of scientific proof. But with confirmation came another call, this one from the Cedar Rapids Police Department. They'd exhumed the remains from Jessica's grave and completed new DNA testing. The girl we'd buried, the girl we'd mourned as our daughter for 28 years, was Rebecca Thompson of Austin, Texas. She'd gone missing in July 1995, 6 months after Jessica, and her family had never stopped searching. I drove back to Iowa alone to meet with Rebecca's father, Thomas Thompson. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, sitting across from a man who looked like an older version of myself. Both of us fathers who'd lost daughters to the same evil. I don't blame you, he said after I'd explained everything. You couldn't have known, and at least now we know. At least now we can bury our girl properly. He was 72 years old, had spent 29 years not knowing what happened to his 18-year-old daughter. His wife had died 5 years earlier, never getting answers, but he was gracious in a way that humbled me, grateful for closure even as my family celebrated resurrection. Will you tell me about her? I asked him. About Rebecca? So he did. About a girl who wanted to be a teacher, who volunteered at animal shelters, who'd been saving money for college when she disappeared after a summer job shift. About a family that had never given up hope, that had spent decades following false leads and supporting other families with missing children. "She would have been happy about your Jessica," Thomas said as we prepared to leave. "Rebecca always believed missing kids could be found. She would have wanted you to celebrate." I returned to Houston carrying that blessing, that permission to be grateful without guilt. Thomas Thompson's grace gave me something I didn't even know I needed, the right to be completely happy about my daughter's return. Jessica was released from the hospital's psychiatric unit after 3 weeks, but she wasn't ready to leave Houston. The city had been her home, in one way or another, for 31 years. Moving back to Iowa felt too overwhelming, too much like trying to step back into a life that no longer fit. We helped her find a small apartment near the hospital, close to her therapy team and the support system she'd built as Ashley Parker. It wasn't much, just 1 bedroom and a kitchenette, but it was hers. The first place that had truly belonged to her in 31 years. "I want to learn to be Jessica again," she told us the day she moved in, "but I need to do it slowly. I need to integrate who I was with, who I became." Sarah and I extended our hotel stay indefinitely. Cedar Rapids would wait. Our retirement plans would wait. Right now, our daughter needed us, and we weren't going anywhere. "However long it takes," I promised her, echoing the words I'd said that first morning in the hospital. "We've got all the time in the world." 6 months later, I was sitting at Jessica's kitchen table, watching her attempt to make cinnamon rolls from Sarah's recipe. It was her 5th try, and she was getting frustrated with the dough, which refused to cooperate despite her best efforts. "They're never going to be as good as Mom's," she said, flour dusting her hands and somehow ending up in her hair. "They don't have to be," I told her. "They just have to be yours." She looked different now, healthier. She'd gained weight, good weight that filled out her face and made her look less like a refugee from her own life. Her hair had grown longer, showing more of the auburn color I had remembered from her childhood. She wore clothes that fit properly, jeans and sweaters she'd chosen herself, not donated items from the hospital. More importantly, she looked at peace in a way that Ashley Parker never had. The integration was working. Jessica and Ashley were becoming one person, someone who remembered both lives and was learning to live with both sets of experiences. The apartment had become home. She'd decorated it carefully, with photographs Sarah and I had brought from Iowa, mixed with new memories she was making in Houston. Pictures of her brothers and their families sat next to artwork she'd started creating in therapy, visual representations of her healing process. "Dr. Martinez says I'm ready," she announced suddenly, still focused on the rebellious dough. "Ready for what?" "To testify. In the federal case. They've arrested 3 people based on the information I've provided, and they think they can get convictions if I'm willing to take the stand." I felt my protective instincts flare. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'll never be ready," she said honestly. "But I'm strong enough. And those people need to be stopped. There are other girls, Dad. Girls who might still be saved if these prosecutions work." She'd made the decision to become a social worker, was enrolled in classes at the University of Houston to finish the degree she'd started as a 17-year-old. Her focus was on trafficking survivors, helping other women navigate the system she'd learned to understand through her own recovery. "I want to take my nightmare and turn it into something that might help someone else," she'd told us when she announced her career plans. Ashley Parker survived by forgetting. Jessica Andrews is going to heal by remembering and helping others remember they're worth saving. Christopher and Matthew had visited 3 times now, bringing their families, helping Jessica get to know the nieces and nephews she'd never met. The first visit had been awkward, everybody trying too hard to bridge 31 years of absence. But kids are resilient, and Jessica was a natural with children. Her nephew Tyler, Christopher's 8-year-old, had declared her the coolest aunt ever after she taught him to make paper airplanes and told him stories about adventures in faraway places. She didn't tell him what those adventures really were, of course. That would come later, when he was older, when he could understand that sometimes people survived terrible things and became stronger because of it, not in spite of it. "I've been thinking about the treehouse," Jessica said, successfully rolling out the dough on her 3rd attempt. "What about it? Remember how scared you were of heights, but you built it anyway because I wanted one?" I nodded. That treehouse had become symbolic somehow, representing all the things we do for our children despite our own fears and limitations. "I think I might need you to climb a few more mountains before we're done," she said, echoing words she'd spoken in those early days at the hospital. "Then, that's what I'll do," I told her, the same response I'd given then. "However many mountains, however long it takes." She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. "That's good, because I've been accepted to graduate school, the UT social work program. I want to get my master's degree, maybe eventually get licensed to do therapy myself. More time in Houston, more years of building this new version of our family, one that accommodated distance and trauma, and the reality that healing isn't a destination, but a journey." Sarah and I had already started looking at houses in Houston, retirement properties that would let us be close without hovering. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it more than any words I'd ever spoken. The timer went off for the cinnamon rolls, and Jessica pulled them from the oven with a triumphant grin. They were golden brown, not quite the perfect shape of Sarah's, but close enough. The kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon and sugar and possibility. We sat at her small table, eating slightly imperfect cinnamon rolls that tasted like forgiveness, like second chances, like all the Saturday mornings we'd never had but might still get. Outside, Houston continued its busy life, completely unaware that in a small apartment near the medical district, a family was learning how to be whole again. Jessica told me about her classes, her new friends, the support group she'd joined for trafficking survivors. I told her about the letter I'd gotten from Thomas Thompson, how Rebecca's funeral had given her family closure they'd waited 29 years to find. "We lost 31 years, I said eventually, the weight of that loss still sometimes catching me off guard. "We did," Jessica agreed. "But we have now. We have whatever time is left, and I intend to make every second of it count." She was right, of course. We couldn't get back the decades that had been stolen from us. But we had this moment, and the next one, and all the moments that would follow, because my daughter had come home. Not the same, not whole in the way she'd been before, but alive, healing, building something beautiful from the pieces of her broken life. And that was enough. That was everything.